Is patriotism a virtue, or is it a slippery slope to national supremacy? Is it possible to honor one's country while also criticizing it? Can civic nationalism overcome the dangers inherent in ethnic nationalism? And if so, how can governments balance prioritizing the needs of their citizens with the duties we all have to humanity at large? All of that and more in today's video. What does it mean to love one's country? Imagine standing in a crowded square on a national holiday. Around you, parades triumphantly process banners featuring national slogans. National flags ripple in the wind. School bands play spirited marches and a rousing edition of your national anthem, and fireworks wait to be set alight against the evening sky. Despite the celebratory mood, the atmosphere throughout the crowd is not uniform. Some people cheer and speak proudly of their heritage, while others stand uneasily at the edges, shuffling their feet while glancing nervously at the many national flags on display. For some, patriotism is the lifeblood of their community and the shield that defends civilization itself. For others, however, these patriotic displays feel like preludes to exclusion. Both sides feel the weight of history. Without the unifying force of patriotism, nations can break apart into divided factions and be overtaken by enemies that eventually erase their sense of national identity entirely. When patriotism becomes excessive, however, nations can persecute minorities within their borders and profess a destiny, perhaps one divinely instituted, to overtake and dominate the nations that surround them. Especially today, as nationalist movements rise once again across the globe, the question of how we should love our countries, finding a balance between spurning them and idolizing them, has never been more pressing. If we want to untangle this dilemma, we have to start by asking, what exactly is patriotism? The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle defines patriotism as a sort of virtuous political friendship that instills loyalty to one's community. As mentioned in my Civility Matters video, Aristotle argues that humans are political animals meant to live in community. Since the polis is the soil in which our moral lives grow, it is natural and necessary that citizens share obligations and affections to ensure that neighbors collectively thrive together. Building upon Aristotle's perspective, the ancient Roman statesman Cicero described patriotism as a moral debt akin to gratitude. Just as we owe honor to our parents, so too do we owe honor to our fatherland, which nurtures and sustains us. Aquinas would later call this honor piety, a specialized love owed to one's people by justice. How can a specialized love for one's people be reconciled with the universal dignity and equality of all humans? According to Aquinas, while universal charity is a moral obligation, we have special duties beginning with those closest to us, such as family, community, and country, because we are in the best position to assist those within our immediate sphere of influence, especially in light of the fact that resources are scarce. As the modern philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre adds, while tensions may exist between liberal moral universalism, impartiality to all persons, and the particularism inherent to patriotic loyalty, qualified patriotism is still an important value because the civic responsibilities that hold societies together are imparted through inherited local customs that shape an individual's identity within the context of communal living. If humans owe honor to their homeland, does that mean patriotism precludes criticism of one's nation? Absolutely not. According to MacIntyre, patriotism cannot be blind or uncritical. True loyalty is reflective and reformist because it holds the traditions it inherits accountable. Why? Apart from the importance of understanding tradition as a living entity, as mentioned in my previous video on this channel, if patriotism is love of one's people, then by definition, one should will the best for their nation, which means undergoing appropriate correction when the nation is on the wrong path. If patriotism is a virtuous duty meant to be reflective and adaptive to change, why then do so many worry about patriotism morphing into something unhealthy and dangerous? In short, many people believe that patriotism is either indistinguishable from nationalism or inherently pushes a populace into it. Is there truth to this fear? Well, it's true that nationalism and patriotism heavily overlap. It's incredibly rare to find a nationalist movement that doesn't profess to be patriotic. Nationalism is distinct from mere patriotism and exists in various forms. It's worthwhile, therefore, to examine the various types of nationalism for clarity's sake. The first type of nationalism is the nationalism of self-determination, or the belief that every people ought to have their own nation wherein they can freely govern themselves. This type of nationalism can further be broken down into categories based upon how one defines a people. Second, there is citizens first nationalism, or the belief that a nation's government should prioritize the welfare of its own people above the welfare of foreigners or the world at large. Third, there is supremacist nationalism, or the belief that one nation is inherently superior to others and entitled to dominate them. To approach the topic of nationalism fairly, therefore, let's tackle each of these three types. The first type of nationalism, nationalism of self-determination, raises some of the most philosophically and ethically interesting questions, because it often intertwines with struggles for freedom and cultural survival. At its core, nationalism of self-determination asserts that every people has a right to govern themselves, especially in the wake of oppression at the hands of a hostile people who wish to subjugate or eliminate one's own, such as in the case of colonialism. However, while most people are sympathetic to the notion that subjugated people should have a right to be free and sovereign, it is not always clear what constitutes a people. Should a people be built upon common adherence to certain cultural values, as in the case of civic nationalism? Or should a people be defined by ethnicity, race, or language, as in the case of ethnonationalism? According to the philosopher Ernest Renan, a nation cannot successfully be defined solely by ethnicity, language, or race, since these features don't, on their own, impart beliefs or personality traits, but, rather, must be held together by a shared will to live together, paired with a collective memory that binds people across generations. From this perspective, civic bonds, not bloodlines, form the ethical foundation for legitimate self-rule. Civic bonds are crucial because, as the former politician Yael Tamir argues, national belonging is not merely a political convenience, but a crucial framework for individual autonomy. Our identities, choices, and capacity to live meaningful lives are deeply shaped by shared culture and history. What, though, determines the proper scale by which units of society should be subdivided into people? After all, while E.F. Schumacher underscores the practical advantages of human-scale communities because participation becomes more direct and citizens can better grasp the consequences of collective decisions, there is nevertheless a danger of endless secessionist movements if the subdivision of a community becomes too extensive. In short, to protect against endless fragmentation or the creation of politically unviable states, the modern philosopher Alan Buchanan argues that a people's right to secede is not unconditional, but rather is a remedial right, justified only in response to severe injustices such as systemic oppression, foreign occupation, or cultural genocide. Nationalism of self-determination, then, should exist in response to a true and egregious wrong, not simply in a vacuum. Its relationship to patriotism should be the just desire to protect one's people in the face of oppression. What about the second type of nationalism? If nationalism of self-determination is justified in response to oppression, citizens' first nationalism occupies a more morally ambiguous space. This form of nationalism holds that a government should prioritize the welfare of its own citizens above that of foreigners or the broader world, creating tension between local loyalty and universal moral obligations. While this type of nationalism may flow more naturally from patriotism since, as mentioned earlier in the video, Aquinas maintains that our moral duties follow a hierarchy of charity, we owe special care to those closest to us, it departs from healthy patriotism when it conceives of a national good divorced from objective reality, including the universal constraints of human rights and respect for the dignity of all people. As both Aquinas and the modern political philosopher David Miller argue, while we owe special care to those closest to us, we are also called to act with justice and compassion toward others, particularly when our own responsibilities have been met. Citizens' first nationalism, then, must navigate this delicate balance to remain ethical, honoring the moral priority of one's own people while resisting the temptation to ignore the welfare of others entirely via discrimination or isolationist global neglect. When citizens' first nationalism abandons moral reflection and global solidarity, it can easily slide into the third and most dangerous form, supremacist nationalism. This ideology asserts that one nation is inherently superior to others and entitled to dominate them, rejecting the universal moral constraints that citizen-first nationalism struggles to balance. George Orwell famously described this kind of nationalism as an obsession with power and prestige, a collective identity so fused with the self that it becomes incapable of self-critique and constantly reshapes facts to serve its own agenda. Such supremacy, which exalts the collective self regardless of how great a people truly is, risks discarding outsiders as lesser or unworthy of consideration. As both David Miller and Yael Tamir argue, when focus on one's citizenry comes at the cost of exclusionary attitudes towards immigrants or foreigners, it violates the fundamental human right to culture. While everyone, whether in the majority or minority, has a right to publicly express their cultural identity within the bounds of universal ethics, nobody has a right to impose one's culture on another. As such, Alasdair MacIntyre reminds us that loyalty without critical reflection degenerates into ideology. Supremacist nationalism is disordered patriotism, unmoored from virtue, wherein love of one's country is used to justify aggression, exclusion, or conquest. Beyond being a mere excessive form of patriotism, supremacist nationalism is an unethical distortion of it, threatening the well-being of those both within its borders and throughout the wider world. What then should we ultimately conclude from our analysis of patriotism and nationalism? Patriotism, when understood rightly, is not a threat, but a virtue. Healthy patriotism is a reflective, reforming love of one's country that inspires citizens to care for their communities, uphold justice, and work toward the common good. Nationalism, by contrast, is not a single phenomenon, but a spectrum. Self-determination nationalism can be morally justified when it remedies oppression and preserves cultural life. Citizens' first nationalism can be ethically defensible only when it balances loyalty to one's own with duties to others. But supremacist nationalism is a distortion of both patriotism and reason, a force that breeds aggression, exclusion, and injustice. As such, the lesson is clear. We should celebrate patriotism, not just within our own country but for all peoples, supports legitimate claims to self-determination within ethical bounds, and hold governments accountable to both their citizens and the broader moral obligations we share as members of the human family. At the same time, we must reject outright any ideology that exalts one nation over all others, because love of country loses its virtue when it harms others. And we must also beware the opposite danger, denying or suppressing patriotism altogether in the name of avoiding nationalism, as that risks leaving citizens disconnected from their communities and eroding the civic bonds that sustain society. To embrace patriotism responsibly, therefore, is to honor both the particular bonds that make our communities thrive and the universal values that allow us to flourish together, ensuring that loyalty never becomes oppression and pride never becomes supremacy. What do you think? Is patriotism a virtue? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when new videos are released. Also be sure to like this video so that YouTube recommends it to others. If you would like to support this channel for as little as $1 a month, you can also become a supporter on Patreon. Links in the description of this video. We are not defined by either blind loyalty or by the fear of loving our communities, but by the way we choose to engage with our nations thoughtfully and ethically. Patriotism isn't about idolizing a flag or rejecting the world beyond our borders, but about caring deeply and working to make our nations better for everyone. No matter what nation you are a citizen of, don't give up on the best version of your nation. Every step towards building a better nation is a quiet act of virtue that shapes a better world. I look forward to exploring these questions and growing in understanding alongside you. Peace be with you. This has been The Philosopher.